Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know the words of the national anthem were first written as a poem on the back of a letter during the War of 1812? Learn how Francis Scott Key anxiously watched the bombardment of American forces at Fort McHenry from a British prison ship in Baltimore Harbor. Discover how this experience inspired him to write the poem, The Defense of Fort McHenry, when he saw the American flag still flying at sunrise.
Okay, so if you check the date on your phone right now, assuming you're listening to this deep dive on release day, or, specifically on March 3rd, you are currently living through a holiday that most people honestly just sleep right through.
Yeah, it's definitely not one of those holidays that gets the big mattress sales or the barbecue invites.
No, definitely not. It is National Anthem Day. And I think for most of us, we just kind of assume the anthem is something that has, well, always existed, like the Grand Canyon or something. Or if we do think about its origin, we usually just associate it with the 4th of July.
Right, which makes sense. But March 3rd is actually the anniversary of when the Star-Spangled Banner became the official law of the land.
And that distinction between the song being written and the song actually becoming the law is where this whole story just gets wild. Because the gap between those two events isn't just a few years.
No, it is over a century.
Yeah, that was the very first thing that jumped out at me in the research for this deep dive. Because Francis Scott Key writes the poem in 1814. But Congress doesn't pass the act making it the national anthem until
March 3rd, 1931.
Right, 1931. That is a 117-year delay.
It really challenges the whole idea of an instant classic, It took generations of cultural percolation, military tradition, and executive orders to finally get President Herbert Hoover to sign that piece of paper.
So here is the plan for our deep dive today. We are going to span that whole 117-year history, but we're mostly going to zoom in on the origin point. We really need to talk about Francis Scott Key, who, by the way, was definitely not the person I thought he was. And we're going to get into the incredibly specific, terrifying circumstances of the night he actually wrote it.
And we also need to talk about the physics of the flag itself. Because the Star-Spangled Banner that Key saw isn't the flag we see today. It was a physical anomaly.
Yeah, that part is fascinating. And finally, we're going to take a bit of a philosophical turn, I guess you could say, because the sources we have today act as this bridge between that piece of cloth in 1814 and a much older, deeper concept of standards or banners. We're going to ask why human beings feel this deep need to wave things in the air to say who they are.
It's really a question of identity at its core. Whether it's a flag over a fort or a title of liberty in an ancient text, the impulse is exactly the same.
Okay, let's start with the context, though, because if you don't understand the War of 1812, the anthem just sounds like a song about fireworks. And frankly, the War of 1812 is the one history class usually just kind of glosses over.
Right. It is often called the Second War of Independence. But in 1814, it felt a lot more like the end of independence.
Yeah.
The situation was dire. The British hadn't just blockaded trade, they were on a scorched earth campaign. They had already marched into Washington, D.C.
Which is a very nice, polite way of saying they burned it down.
Literally. They burned the White House, They burned the Capitol. President Madison had to completely flee the city. The psychological state of the country was absolute fragility at that point.
Just total panic.
Exactly. There was a very real fear that the whole experiment of America was about to be completely crushed.
And right into this chaos walks Francis Scott Key. Now, in my head, before I read the source file, I just pictured him as a soldier, maybe a captain or something, standing on the wall, peering through the smoke.
That is the common image everyone has, but it's totally wrong.
Yo.
Key was a 35-year-old lawyer from Georgetown. He was strictly a civilian, and here is the really interesting nuance. He was actually a massive critic of the war itself.
Wait, really? The guy who wrote the ultimate war anthem was anti-war?
He was. He was a devout religious man and a pacifist by nature. In fact, he had referred to the declaration of war as a, quote, lump of wickedness.
Wow. A lump of wickedness.
Yeah, he didn't want to be involved in the fighting at all.
So how does a pacifist lawyer end up in the middle of the most pivotal naval bombardment of the entire war?
Well, it starts with a friendship. The British had captured a prominent American physician named Dr. William Beans.
And Beans wasn't just some random doctor, right? The notes mention he was a bit of a troublemaker.
So he definitely was. Beans had this habit of capturing British stragglers soldiers who had just wandered off from their units and throwing them in the local jail.
Haha, just an ordinary citizen arresting the British Army.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the British military obviously didn't appreciate a civilian arresting their troops, so they arrested him.
Okay, so Key gets tacked for the rescue mission. Like, go get our doctor back.
Exactly. Key was persuasive, he was well-connected, and he was a lawyer. So he sails out to the British fleet under a flag of truce. He actually boards the British flagship, the HMS Tunnan.
Which, just to pause there for a second, takes some serious guts. You're sailing right into the mouth of the enemy fleet that literally just burned down your capital.
It really does. And initially, the diplomacy actually works. Key dines with the British officers. It was all very civilized, apparently, and he shows them letters from British prisoners testifying that the Americans had treated them really well.
Okay.
And so the British officers agree to release Dr. Beams.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
There is always a catch.
While Key and his companion were on board, they just saw too much.
Yeah.
The British were actively preparing for the assault on Baltimore. They were openly discussing target coordinates, troop strengths, the whole invasion plan.
So the British admiral basically says, sure, you can have the doctor, but you can't leave yet.
Right. They were detained. They weren't exactly prisoners of war, but they were forced to return to their own small truce vessel, which was then tethered securely to a British ship. So they were essentially given a front row seat to the destruction of their own country, but they were completely powerless to do anything about it.
Man, that completely sets the stage for the night of September 13th, 1814. And I think this is where we really need to get into the sensory details of the sources, because the lyrics we all know, rockets' red glare and bombs bursting in air, they aren't just poetic metaphors. They are literal descriptions of specific weaponry.
Absolutely. The rockets were Congreve rockets. These were a relatively new technology for the British at the time, and they weren't precise like modern missiles are today. They were highly erratic.
Just flying everywhere.
Yeah, they would screech through the air, leaving this terrifying red trail of exhaust, and they could veer off course super easily. They were mostly designed for psychological warfare, just to terrify the enemy.
And the bombs, what were those?
Those were heavy mortar shells fitted with burning fuses. They were specifically designed to explode above the target to rain shrapnel down on the people below, hence bombs bursting in air.
So picture this. Key is stuck on this little boat. It's raining, it's dark, and the sky is just filled with these screeching red streaks and massive explosions. And the sources emphasize that his dominant emotion in that moment wasn't patriotism, it was just anxiety.
It was absolute terror. You have to remember, the British fleet pounded Fort McHenry with over 1,500 rounds of ammunition.
Good grief.
Over the course of 25 hours, Key knew that as long as he could hear the noise, the fort was still resisting.
Right, because if they surrendered, the shooting stops. So it's actually the silence that was the terrifying part?
Precisely. In the middle of the night, the bombardment slackened. And then it just stopped. And in that pre-dawn darkness, with the rain and the thick mist, Key had absolutely no idea if the silence meant the British had given up or if the fort had surrendered.
That is the ultimate cliffhanger. He's just pacing the deck, agonizing, waiting for the sun to come up.
And this brings us right to the dawn's early light. When the mist finally cleared on the morning of September 14th, Key looked through his spyglass. He knew if he saw the British Union Jack flying over the fort, it was over. America might literally be over.
But he doesn't see the Union Jack. He sees the stars and stripes.
He sees the American flag, and he later describes that exact moment as a, quote, most merciful deliverance.
Okay, I want to stop right here and talk about that specific flag for a minute, because the research on this is just fascinating. The flag Key saw, the actual physical object waving over the fort, was a total anomaly in American history.
It really was. Most people picture the modern 50-star flag, or maybe they picture the 13-star Betsy Ross flag. But the flag over Fort McHenry was the Star-Spangled Banner, authorized by the Flag Act of 1794.
And what exactly made it so different?
Well, Vermont and Kentucky had recently joined the Union. So, following the logic of the time, Congress decided to add 2 stars and 2 stripes. So the flag had 15 stars and 15 stripes.
Which, if you think about it, if they had kept up with that logic for every new state, it would have been a visual disaster today. We'd have a flag with 50 skinny little stripes. It would look like a barcode.
Exactly. It would be unreadable. They eventually realized it was totally unsustainable and went back to the 13 stripes to honor the original colonies. But for that one brief window in history, The flag was physically fundamentally different.
And it was huge, right? We aren't talking about a dinky little flag you put out on your front porch.
Oh, no, not at all. The garrison flag was 30 feet by 42 feet.
30 by 42. That is literally larger than my entire apartment.
It was so massive that the woman who made it, Mary Pickersgill, couldn't even sew it in her own house. She had to rent a nearby brewery and spread all the fabric out on the malt house floor just to have enough room to work on it.
That detail is just incredible to me. So this massive 15-stripe brewery floor flag is what Key sees rippling in the morning breeze. And at this point, the British fleet is actually preparing to withdraw because their general, Robert Ross, had been killed, and they realized they just couldn't take the arbor.
Right, and that is the exact moment inspiration strikes.
Yeah.
He's still on the boat. He reaches into his pocket and he finds an old letter.
He didn't even have a journal with it.
No journal. Just the back of a letter he happened to have shoved in his pocket. And he starts scribbling the lines we all know today. OSA, can you see?
It's just such a relatable human detail. The most important song in American history was literally drafted on the back of junk mail because he didn't have anything else handy.
Yeah, he finished the draft on the boat ride back to shore, and then he polished it up into 4 stanzas at the Indian Queen Hotel in Baltimore the very next night.
And there's a quote in the sources where he actually describes visualizing the scene as he wrote it. He called the sunrise a, quote, bright streak of gold mingled with crimson, followed by another as the morning sun rose.
It's very poetic.
But originally, he didn't call the poem the Star-Spangled Banner, did he?
No, the original title was The Defense of Fort McHenry. Which is, well, it's fine. It's descriptive, at least.
It's a bit dry.
It's a bit dry. But he showed it to his brother-in-law, Judge G.H. Nicholson, who really loved it. And Nicholson took the poem and realized that the meter fit a popular melody perfectly. And this brings us to the other great irony of the national anthem.
The music.
The music. The tune was not American at all. It was British.
So we took a poem about surviving a horrific British attack and set it to a British song.
We did. The song was called To Anacreon in Heaven. It was actually the constitutional anthem of the Anacreontic Society over in London.
Which sounds like a very serious secret society, but it was basically just a gentleman's music club, right?
Exactly. It was a club for amateur musicians. And the song was infamous even then for being incredibly difficult to sing. The melody spans an octave and a half. It was specifically designed to show off the vocal range of the club members.
Which honestly explains so much. Every time I see a pop star struggling to hit the high note on the rocket's red glare, I can just blame the Anacreontic Society.
You really can. It was never meant to be an easy, casual sing-along. But despite the vocal difficulty, the combination of Key's stirring lyrics and that soaring melody just went viral. It was published in a Baltimore newspaper on September 20th, 1814, and it spread across the country within weeks.
But then comes the long pause we talked about at the beginning.
The long pause. It became a very popular patriotic song, sure.
Yeah.
Throughout the 19th century, most military branches started using it. The Navy formally adopted it for official use in 1889, and then President Woodrow Wilson signed an executive order in 1916, saying it should be played at official occasions.
But an executive order still isn't the same thing as a law passed by Congress.
Correct. It took until March 3rd, 1931, under President Hoover, for it to finally be codified as the official national anthem. And there was actually a lot of debate about it. Some people thought it was way too militaristic. Some people wanted America the Beautiful instead. But the history of it won out in the end.
Okay, so that covers the what and the when of the story. But I want to shift gears to the why, because the sources we're looking at today take this really interesting detour into the broader concept of a standard.
This is where we kind of zoom out.
Yeah.
Because the flag Key saw wasn't just a physical piece of cloth. It was a standard. And that word has a very heavy historical meaning. It implies something you stand by or stand under. It's a rallying point.
Right, and the sources bring up a parallel from ancient history, specifically from the Book of Mormon, that I think really clarifies this deep human need.
It does. The text describes a historical figure named Captain Moroni. And he's in a situation that's actually not unlike Keyes' nation is fracturing. There are severe internal and external threats to their liberty.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just give a speech to his people. He creates a physical object.
He rips his own coat, right?
He rents his coat, yeah, and he ties it to the end of a pole. He calls it the title of liberty. But what is really fascinating is that he writes a specific list on it. The source quotes the actual inscription he wrote. In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives, and our children.
It's basically a manifesto of everything that matters to them.
It is, and I think that is the core connection here. Whether it is 70 BC or 1814 AD, When human beings feel like their entire way of life is threatened, they have this instinct to create a banner. They need a visible symbol that says, here is the line. This is what we love. This is what we will fight for.
There's a quote in the research from Elder M. Russell Ballard that connects this ancient idea to modern life. He wasn't talking about a literal war, but he was talking about a document called The Family, a proclamation to the world.
Right. And he compared that document explicitly to a banner. Held aloft, it is a standard for the world to know where we stand. And he urged people to actually live by its precepts.
It really changes the definition of what a flag even is. A flag doesn't have to be made of fabric. It can be a document. It can be a song. It can be absolutely anything that clearly defines who you are and what you believe to be true.
Exactly. It's really about visibility. Keith desperately looked for the flag because he needed to know the identity of the fort hadn't changed during the night. We constantly use standards to find our people and to remind ourselves of our core values.
And I think that brings it all right back to the idea of endurance. The Star-Spangled Banner isn't a song about winning a battle quickly or easily. It is a song about surviving a really long, dark night.
That is the core theme. The source material refers to it as a unique message of American endurance. It wasn't written in the bright sunshine of a victory. It was conceived in the extreme anxiety of a bombardment. It's about the fact that against all odds, the flag was still there.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a few provocative questions that were posed by the source material because they're surprisingly personal for you to think about.
They are. They essentially ask you to take this entire concept of a standard and apply it directly to your own life.
The first question is, what is so important to you that you would want a flag to represent it?
Yeah, if you had to plant a pole in your front yard today, what does that flag actually represent? Is it your family? Is it your faith? Is it a specific kind of freedom?
And literally, what would you write on it? If you had Captain Moroni's torn coat or Francis Scott Key's old envelope, what are the words you would use?
In memory of what, for the support of.
Yeah.
It's a really good exercise to actually sit down and list them out.
And finally, besides waving a physical flag, how else do you show what you believe is true?
That is the real challenge, isn't it? We don't all carry literal banners around with us, but we show our standards through our daily actions, the way we treat other people, the things we choose to prioritize. Your life is effectively a banner that everyone around you is reading every single day.
Wow. That is a heavy thought for a Tuesday. Or, for National Anthem Day.
It is, but I think it adds some really necessary depth to the holiday. Next time you hear the song, maybe at a ball game, or maybe just on TV, don't just wait around for the play ball part. Think about the pacifist lawyer stuck on the boat.
Think about the 15 huge stripes. Think about the brewery floor where it was made.
And think about what you are enduring for.
I love that. That is going to do it for us on this deep dive into the Star-Spangled Banner. We highly encourage you to share your thoughts on those questions with a friend, and we hope you view the flag just a little differently next time you see it waving.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.